welcome. With parades and speeches, we honored our military veterans yesterday. But does the Big Apple treat them like heroes year-round? Not quite. The good and the bad news in a moment. Also today, Startup New York, Governor Cuomo's tax-free way of luring jobs to the state. Is it working? Is it fair to tax-paying firms already here? Then surrogate mothers, hiring them is illegal in New York. Is that unfair to gay men who want families? Today's Public Intellectual segment offers hope for political compromise. A new study shows that love and hate are just a few bucks apart. And towards the end of the hour, we'll remember Wetlands, the Tribeca mecca of music and eco-activism. First, helping New York City's 216,000 veterans. It's a story of progress and dysfunction. Homelessness is allegedly down among the city's veterans, but within the bureaucracy that delivers all kinds of services, there's political disarray. According to our guest, Kristen Meriwether, reporter for Gotham Gazette, and Jason Hansman is here too to give us a veteran's view. He is Director for External Program Relations at YAVA, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Welcome to both of you. Thank you. So I thought homelessness was going up in New York City in every category. Not true for vets?
According to a recent survey, no. And I was actually just as surprised. I found this out at a panel last week. And it was down, I believe it's 60-something% among veterans, according to this HUD survey.
Down 60% in 1 year?
No, that's since 2011. The federal government decided to really have this push to reduce homelessness among veterans. They actually want to end it by the end of 2015. And so their answer was to do a lot more cooperation and coordination between federal, state, and local level, and they came up with a plan, and supposedly this plan is bearing fruit.
And what are the numbers, just so people have a sense? How many homeless vets were there at the peak, supposedly, and how many are there now in the city?
There was a reduction of nearly, or a little over 3,000 in that time period. 3,000 less veterans.
Yeah, so if that's a reduction of 60%, then it probably went from 5,000 down to 2,000.
I'm really bad at math.
So that would be my back-of-the-envelope take from junior high school math. But if they're able to reduce it that much, that would suggest that there are some common issues that are causing homelessness or mightily contributing to homelessness among so many veterans. Would you say that's the case?
I think that is the case. I think there are plans, and I think part of this is also that there is this combined effort at the city and federal level. So there's a ton of programs that the VA has set up, everything from HUD-VASH to grant per diem programs to supportive services for veterans' families, really to make this push to 2015. I think that's part of it. They're throwing a lot of money at the issue, and I'm glad that it's bearing fruit, or at least seems to be bearing fruit here in New York City for the amount of money they've been spending.
So that's the good news. You've also got some maybe not so good news about how the bureaucracy functions with respect to vets in New York.
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting politics, I guess, with veterans. There's a couple of different agencies, and there's a little bit of, I don't know if discourse is the right word, but with the Veterans Advisory Board, that's one group that has been under scrutiny for the majority of the year. They came on in 1987 when MOVA was created, the Mayor's Office of Veteran Affairs, with the idea of kind of being the quote-unquote boots on the ground. Okay, there's this issue in this area. Let's bring this policy issue to the mayor's office.
That's what this board does.
That is what this board is supposed to do. In 2002, they expanded the board, and in 2006, they made some reporting requirements. But here we sit several years later, and whether or not that's being done, there's a lot of questions about the transparency of that particular board. Are these members doing what they're supposed to be doing? There's a lot of the same members that have been on the board for a while. So whether or not they're actually doing that, there's a lot of questions about that.
Does your group communicate with, or maybe more importantly, do you hear from the members of this Mayoral Advisory Board on Veterans?
You know, we do, only because Paul Rykoff, our CEO and founder, is a member of that board. Or I should actually say was a member, as his term expired a couple years back, and there hasn't been a reappointment yet. So we do, only through this formal process of him actually being on the board. As just a normal person that works in the community, I don't hear that much from the board at all, and it really doesn't have as much impact on the work that I do, which is really a shame since it's supposed to advise the mayor and the rest of the city on what to do for veterans issues.
And they were trying to do something in the spring of this year to shore up this board?
Well, they had an oversight panel, or an oversight hearing, I'm sorry, and it was originally supposed to be in the spring and ended up getting pushed. But they ended up the members of the board weren't even on a website, the MOVA website. So they ended up putting those on there. But still, when the meetings were supposed to happen, if you wanted to reach out to these people, how do you get in touch with them? There was none of that information. The only way you get in touch with these people is if you happen to run into them and you happen to know who they already were.
So should they be, in theory, kind of city council members at large for the veterans community citywide?
I think people should have access to them, especially veterans. I mean, if a veteran doesn't even know, and I would venture to say if you went and did a poll of veterans across New York City, especially younger vets, they had no idea that this existed. So in that capacity, I think, yeah, they should be at least accessible and be able to hear some of the issues that are going on. I mean, the problem could be, and probably is, that they're a little bit disconnected from the issues that are actually going on the ground.
And it's a tiny budget, isn't it? Like $500,000 for all these vets. It's like a couple of bucks a veteran.
Yeah, it's the Mayor's Office of Veteran Affairs has a very small budget. I think it's $549,000 or $529,000. So, and a staff of only 5, including the commissioner. So to deal with 200,000 veterans or 216,000 veterans, that's not a lot of people.
And to do what, Jason, ideally? I mean, we think of Veterans Affairs as a federal government function. What is the city supposed to be doing, in your opinion, or could they be doing to service veterans in New York City?
I think wrangling all these agencies together, I think that is the key role that MOVA should be playing, is getting everyone to play nicely together, getting everyone to make sure that, whatever commitment the city of New York has made to veterans, that they're fulfilling on it. Everything from homelessness to, the million public agencies and the million public programs that we have in New York City. And making sure that they're holding them accountable and making sure that we're moving that goalpost.
So I think for vets, there's often a big three, which is sort of housing, education, and health. Would you say that's the same for New York City, and the city could be augmenting whatever the feds are doing?
I think that's right, and filling in the gap. So, for all 3 of those, I think the federal government has, a fairly good spread of programs. But if we look at, the education, especially student veterans make up a good portion of the population here in New York City, and a good portion, if not the majority, of post 9/11 veterans. So, really doing outreach and making sure that we're taking care of that constituency group, especially on the education side, I think would be huge.
Your theme at YAVA for Veterans Day this year was Veterans Rising. That's kind of in opposition to how people usually talk about veterans as problems?
I think that's exactly right. I think, we have a habit here in the country talking about all the issues that are plaguing veterans, but not talking about the huge successes. Just yesterday you had hundreds of post 9/11 vets and hundreds of veterans, period, marching down Fifth Avenue for the Veterans Day parade. I think this big unifying moment that happens every single year. And I think what we are trying to get across is that veterans can and should feel empowered, both, on their own as a group of people, but everything that we do in government and everything we do in the veteran space should be about empowering this generation and previous generations to reach their potential.
As a last piece of advice to veterans living in New York City, watching this program, if there are services that they want from city government, with this hidden agency, practically, was part of the message of this segment, what should they do to reach out and find out what services are available to them?
Certainly they can reach out to MOVA, the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs, but I would encourage them to reach out to veteran service organizations like Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. One of the many programs we run is a case management program here in the city to help vets navigate. It's not easy. It's not easy to navigate what's going on at the city, the federal, or the state level, but we have case managers that do just that on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over the years, New York has gained a reputation as the last place to start a business. High taxes, the chief complaint. But in the past year, taxes have been cut, and Startup New York was launched. That's the campaign, which includes the offer of a decade of zero taxes for certain firms that launch here or move here. Ads like this have been airing across the country.
The new New York is open. Open to innovation. Open to ambition. Open to bold ideas. That's why New York has a new plan. Dozens of tax-free zones all across the state. Move here, expand here, or start a new business here and pay no taxes for 10 years. We're New York. If there's something that creates more jobs and grows more businesses, we're open to it. Start a tax-free business at startupny.com.
So is Startup New York the job magnet Governor Cuomo has hoped for? The number of participants in the campaign has doubled recently. Nonetheless, as the program expands, it has attracted criticism from left and right. With us, Leslie Whatley, Executive Vice President of Startup New York, and on Skype from Albany, Ron Deutsch, Director of New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness, a critic of the program. Welcome to both of you. Hi.
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 Leslie, give people who don't know the basics. What's the underlying goal and structure of Startup New York?
Well, the underlying goal is job creation. And the structure that we're doing it is the colleges and universities across this state. There's 64 SUNYs, there's over 100 private universities, and there's many CUNYs. They're taking space that is currently unutilized or underutilized, and they're creating zones. They're getting approval for these zones, and they're determining what their mission is with regard to the program, what kind of companies they want to work with, what kind of science works with their school mission. And then if a company goes into that zone and affiliates with the university, for 10 years they get to operate tax-free, as long as they create net new jobs.
Why does it have to do with universities? Why couldn't a freestanding company come to New York and take advantage of the same thing?
That's been tried, and it didn't have the same level of success that we were looking for. But if you take a look at other models like Silicon Valley or MIT or even the Raleigh-Durham Triangle, where there was a public-private partnership between the universities and business, they worked together and it grew jobs and it grew the technical capabilities of those communities. So if you take that now and you apply it statewide in New York, look at the potential that it has. We've already got 58 schools with approved plans. The number goes up every week. We've got 41 companies in the program that are pledging to create almost 1,800 jobs, and they're pledging to invest almost $80 million in the state. And as people are seeing the types of companies that are coming to the universities, it's just catching fire. And the science that's coming out of this is fascinating. We have genome centers up in Buffalo and in the city, and U Buffalo has a brand new medical school. We have Downstate Medical, we have Stony Brook. We have fantastic academic institutions.
This is all for science and technology jobs?
There's advanced manufacturing, we've got 3D printing companies, we've got biomed, we've got renewable energy. There's no limit to what could be done.
So before we bring in Ron Deutsch, do you know that they wouldn't have come here without this zero tax pledge for 10 years? And do you have any numbers that you can put on, how many jobs you think this has created net that wouldn't have been created?
Well, first of all, we have to track the numbers, and we're going to continue to track the numbers over the years, and the companies have to live up to the projections that they've made in order to get the tax benefits. And we know the companies have come here because of the advertising, how they've seen that commercial, because they've told us. We got Modern Meadow, who is with Downstate Medical. They're the company that makes leather and meat from a test tube instead of harming animals. They saw the commercial from California. We've got Bach that makes a low-income, low-cost tablet for underprivileged children. They were down in Haiti and they looked at doing business in Detroit or in Pittsburgh, but they saw the ad and they called Buffalo and they got a lot of love, so they came to Buffalo. We've got Dado, the guy that founded the company, went to Connecticut. He was an RIT graduate. He's bringing his growth back to RIT, and they're going to hire 80 jobs there. And I can keep rattling these off.
Ron, sounds like a good thing in theory for the state, and with some of the stories that Leslie was just telling, why not?
I think a lot of these things sound like good in theory, but in practice, they've historically proven to be less than ideal. So I guess I look at this as a history lesson. I mean, certainly we know that the Empire Zones program was fraught with waste, fraud, and abuse. And I know that changes have been made to Startup New York so that it's different than the Empire Zone program. But quite honestly, we've been doing designated tax-free zones as a form of economic development for decades now. And time again, we've shown that these programs just don't work.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, which is history has shown where some of those previous programs didn't work, and that's where this one tried to correct for where perhaps some of those other programs were weak.
Can you get specific?
Right, and if I had $1 for every time I heard that, I'd be a wealthy man myself.
Well, I think this is an important thing to drill down on. So what is different from previous enterprise zone programs, tax-free zone programs to attract business, and why would it work out differently?
There is a lot of detail in the legislation and the regulations that focus on anti-fraud provisions. So one of the issues with the Empire Zone, for example, was a thing that we call shirt changing, where the company just reincorporated it or moved from one part of the state to another part of the state to get those benefits. There's a look-back period on the companies to determine how many employees they have versus what they had and how they were previously incorporated, so we're trying to not let that through. There's anti-competition clauses where we have to take a look at the community that the tax-free zone is located in and all the adjacent census plots to see if there's a competitor. The Department of Labor is involved in this process as well as ESD and the school. So I totally respect your point, but we've tried to do our homework and prevent some of those from occurring.
And I respect what you're saying, but I would take objection with the fact that that you're eliminating the anti-competition clause there. In particular, the governor made an announcement. I think the first company you announced was Datto in Rochester, New York, which is a data backup recovery solutions type of business. And a brief cursory review of businesses in Rochester found at least 5 or 6 businesses doing, if not the exact same thing, something very, very similar. So I guess my question to you would be, how can these existing businesses who've been playing by the rules, paying their taxes, compete against a company coming in to do the same exact thing they're doing, but that company won't have to pay any taxes for 10 years? I would suggest that that sets up an incredibly uneven playing field in New York State, and it's unfair to the existing businesses who are here already doing everything that they're supposed to do. Now, if Datto creates 80 jobs and we put 100 jobs out of business because of this unfair competition, it doesn't make any sense.
How about in that particular case, before you even talk about the general concept, he's talking about a particular firm that came in and took advantage of this in Rochester, where he says there was or were particular firms doing the same thing.
We have had nobody complain to us. There is a provision within the regulations and the law as well that says before a business can sponsor an application to the state, we have to give 5-day public notice. When that 5-day public notice is given, the specific product and service is put in the ad so the public gets to see what the business is going to do when they go into the tax-free zone. Now, with any of the companies that we have in the program, we've had anybody respond to the 5-day notice, Datto included, and we looked into the allegations that there was somebody with an identical product and service, and it turned out not to be correct.
The Rochester Business Journal would take umbrage with that, I think.
Ron, is that your primary concern? Do you also have a concern about businesses just not doing their civic duty, in effect, by paying taxes because they're making profits here?
Well, I think another concern that I have is that these businesses are still going to require services at the local level, whether that's police or fire or emergency, roads and plowing, those type of things. The children of the employees will still be going to school in the school district. So all these services are going to be provided, but these businesses aren't going to be paying for them. So I find that to be problematic. And one of the other pieces of Startup New York is the fact that that employees won't pay income taxes for a 5-year period. So you really basically pushing the tax burden down to everybody else by these businesses not picking up their fair share and their employees not paying their fair share either.
Is that true, that piece that he just said, that even employees of the companies as individuals don't pay individual income taxes?
That's correct. Actually, it's 10 years, not 5. There's limitations after the first 5 years.
All the employees?
The net new employees. So everybody that's hired once the company locates into the tax-free zone, those employees are eligible for no income taxes. But let's go back to the question. The space that we're putting in to the zones is not earning any tax revenue right now. It belongs to the universities or some other form of nonprofit that does not pay property taxes, right? So there is no revenue today.
Using pre-existing space.
There's land or space that's pre-existing. It could belong to the campus or another nonprofit economic development agency in the community, but it's not paying taxes. We are not taking any tax revenue away. Now these people are hired. They come to the communities in many cases. They buy houses, they go to restaurants, they buy shoes, they do put their kids in school, but a lot of the towns in upstate New York, the Buffalos, the Rochesters, have the infrastructure that was there before thousands of jobs left. And we're trying to bring jobs back to those communities.
But does that suggest that it's not the people already in these communities who are being hired, but people are coming from elsewhere, maybe from out of state, to take these jobs? So maybe it doesn't do as much for the people who really need them who are in New York?
It's both. Some of the employees are coming from elsewhere, but let's say I hire you from a company and you come work for me, you're going to probably get backfilled, so that's still a net new job to the community.
Ron, what about those responses to the tax question?
You know, I think it's going to be a very long time before we get our investment back, if we ever do. I mean, consider the fact that we're spending upwards of $200 million just advertising this program all across the country right now. One has to wonder, you know, will we ever get that money back in terms of additional revenues to the state from new jobs being created? But, you know, how can we possibly get that revenue back when, in fact, businesses aren't going to be paying taxes for 10 years?
Ron, how would you stem the bleed if companies
His number
and
was not
jobs
correct,
are...
by the way.
What,
The
you
$200.
dispute
I
that
dispute
number?
that, yes.
Okay, but with that dispute noted, what would you do to try to accomplish the same goal? Does your organization have a plan?
I think you can. The governor actually put this plan out right before he launched Startup New York, a plan that never got a chance to start, which was looking at creating more of an incubator model at our colleges and universities throughout New York. And I think it's smart to try and leverage our academic institutions and try and make sure that businesses see the advantage of partnering with our academic institutions.
This might be a place I can agree with him.
All
And
right.
it's also a side benefit of some of this advertising that we've been doing. Startup New York is a name that suggests that a lot of startup companies, but it's not just startup companies, it's small, medium, large that qualify for startup. But think about it for a moment. It's a tax program. Most companies aren't ready for a tax program until they're a little bit financially stable. So with all of the demand that we've had for this program, a lot of which is entrepreneurs and startup companies, we've been pushing them to the state's incubator program, where once they had a hard time getting leads for these incubators, now we're sending thousands of them their way. And we're trying to promote more incubators at schools across the state, because you're absolutely right. For a healthy ecosystem in this state, we need to start at the entrepreneur and take it all the way through the full successful company.
We're out of time except to ask, when should I check back with you for some results that will be meaningful?
I think in a couple of years we'll be able to see the multiplier effect that's being generated by these jobs, and also we'll see the fascinating types of affiliation that the companies are creating with the schools.
So
Ron,
with
you look
3 years,
amused.
$1 billion in lost revenue.
All right, for the gains or the losses, we will reassess after some time. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When gay couples want to start their families, their options are limited. Gay adoption is unambiguously legal in only about half the states. And in this age of high-tech medicine, there's also artificial insemination for women. But for male couples, finding a surrogate mother is difficult. It depends on the state. Here in New York, a restrictive surrogacy law pushes couples out of state and abroad to find women willing to carry a baby for them. But New York's surrogacy law might be repealed. Joining us to discuss this and his difficult journey to fatherhood is Anthony Brown, the chairman of Men Having Babies. And to fill us in on the legislative angle, Nathan Schaefer, executive director of the Empire State Pride Agenda. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for
Tell us a
having
little
us.
bit about your own story, Anthony. When you decided that you wanted to become parents, what were your options?
Well, my husband and I have been together for 25 years. We thought, I think, originally that we were going to adopt. But to be quite honest with you, we grew up in a generation where for gay men, growing up, getting married, and having a family really wasn't the norm. And I don't think either of us really considered it a possibility until we started thinking about it. Society started changing a bit. And then I think what was instrumental for us was we met a very wonderful lesbian couple who wanted to have a known donor instead of an anonymous sperm donor. And they asked my husband and I if we would help them. And I have 2 children, a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old, biological daughters, that I am not the legal parent of, but that I am their father. And
You are their father through sperm donation,
Yes.
and your friends, the lesbian couple, are raising them.
yes, and they live in our neighborhood, and we see them all the time, and it's wonderful.
And you do see them all the time? You have some, do they know your
Absolutely.
biological
Absolutely.
relationship to them?
And that's the reason why my husband and I thought, you know what, I think instead of adoption, we really want to have our own biological children.
So did you ask the same couple?
It wasn't an option for them, and it wasn't an option in New York. In New York, surrogacy is illegal, as you mentioned. So we really, we didn't want to put them in an awkward position, and it's quite a lot to ask of somebody.
It is quite a lot to ask somebody to, it's much more than a sperm donation, to carry your sperm and I guess their eggs or donated eggs to term in a full pregnancy.
It takes a very special person to be able to do that. And I think some of the opposition to surrogacy would be allayed if people just got a chance to know some of these incredible women, because the majority of surrogacy stories are very loving. They're very, very well, carefully planned and thought out, and everyone is doing it of their own free will.
There's a lot of skepticism, of course, about where the line is between a good thing overall and a kind of exploitation of the women. Nathan, what's the law right now in New York State? What can you do with respect to surrogacy? What can you not do?
Sure. So in New York State right now, any contractual surrogacy arrangement is expressly prohibited by law. In fact, if you were to enter into such an arrangement, you could face criminal penalties. It's the most prohibitive law in the country.
You said contractual arrangement.
That's-
Does that mean where money changes hands, or is it beyond that even?
It means that you're compensating the surrogate who is helping you to create your family. So what you can do in New York is what's called compassionate surrogacy. This is when you do not have a legally enforceable contract and you are not compensating the woman who is carrying your child. That is not recommended at all because of the fact that it is not regulated. It can go wrong at many stages throughout what is a very complicated process
Sure.
and end in a court system that is not favorable to
And it's
surrogacy.
emotionally fraught. There was the famous Baby M case, which is like 30 years old now, but where she was the surrogate mother, or the woman, Meriwether Whitehead, was that her name?
Yes.
Was the surrogate mother, but then she felt that the baby was hers and didn't want to give the baby up.
Yes, this is exactly why New York has the law that it does right now, because of the Baby M case. But there's a very important distinction that I'd like to make from that case to what is commonly practiced now. Meriwether Whitehead served as a traditional surrogate, meaning that it was her egg, and so she had a biological connection to the baby that she was having, for this family from Manhattan. She was in
So she
New
was
Jersey.
actually the mother.
She was the traditional surrogate. That's very different than what is commonly practiced now, which is just gestational surrogacy, whereby you identify an egg donor and then a separate gestational carrier who then in turn has no biological connection to the child.
And is that just so the surrogate mother does not have a biological connection, or is it for other reasons too that gestational surrogacy has become more common?
It has become much more common. It is much more desired by intended parents, and there are legal frameworks in many parts of the country that now regulate that process well. So that is what is highly recommended.
Do many gay men want to use this, couples, and are they increasingly in the states that permit it?
Much more so now than ever before. I think before, adoption has always been the option for gay men. But adoption isn't always an easy process either. You're kind of putting yourself out there looking for a birth mother who, in essence, will select you. And some older gay men feel like they're not the prime candidate for a birth mother looking to place her child. So, and also surrogacy agencies have, as the medical technology has increased, surrogacy agencies and egg donation agencies have sort of skyrocketed, the number of them. And the options are so much more open now, not only for men in New York, because the one clarification I wanted to make is a couple in New York can have a child through surrogacy. The child just can't be born in New York, or a contract would not be honored there. So you have New York men going all over the place. My son was born in North Carolina, for instance, where our surrogate lived.
How did you find your surrogate?
We found her through an agency. And as Nathan mentioned, traditional surrogacy, agencies won't really work with traditional surrogates. They want to have gestational surrogates because that's also where many of the problem cases have come up when there has been a biological relationship with the child. And gestational surrogates have, I think, an easier time psychologically giving the child to the intended parents once the child is born.
I understand you missed the birth because
We
we're so
did.
far away.
We did, which the Child Parent Security Act would have really helped us out, but we had a planned C-section, and so our carrier called us and said, listen, I'm turning my phone off this weekend. We were going to leave on that Tuesday to be down for a Thursday birth. She said, you guys just relax this weekend. So like fools, we turned our phones off too, and her water broke unexpectedly, and we got a frantic call in the middle of the night, and we missed Nicholas's birth.
Unexpected natural childbirth.
Exactly. you try to plan with children and you can't.
I want to put up a map that shows the states and different kinds of surrogacy laws by color. Nathan, what are we looking at here? I guess the basic code is here. The darker the state, the more restrictive the surrogacy laws?
Yeah, if you look at the red states that include New York, Michigan, and Arizona.
I'll note that's the first time I've heard New York referred to as a red state, but go ahead.
There you go, there you go. Those are the most prohibitive surrogacy laws in the country. And so one of the things that's important to note here is that couples from New York are going elsewhere to create their families. Oftentimes, they're going to states that don't even have basic non-protections on the basis of sexual orientation. So they're subject to discrimination at a hospital, for instance. So it's a complete missed opportunity for New York. We're traveling to different parts of the country that just aren't favorable when we think about LGBT equality.
And what are the black states? You can't get much restrictive than New York, but if I assume black is darker than red, do you know?
No, I actually don't know the distinction. I'm not as familiar with this map specifically.
I know in the black states you can't pay somebody for surrogacy.
Yeah.
So it's at least got that in common with New York.
Yeah. And again, what is distinct about New York's law is it could face criminal penalties if you were to engage in these arrangements here.
But there's a repeal movement in Albany now?
Yes, yes. So I'd love to speak about the bill briefly. It's called the Child Parent Security Act. It would legalize contractual surrogacy in New York. It would improve the process for second parent adoption procedures in New York as well, and really serve as model legislation for the country. And it's advancing. It's relatively new in the legislative process, but we've got more and more folks in the state legislature to come on as co-sponsors. I think we're up to 14 in the Senate and 28 in the Assembly. So we are hopeful to see more progress on that in the coming legislative session.
Does the recent election, where the Senate Republicans have more power than they did before, change your prospects?
Not necessarily. We've gotten bipartisan support already on this bill, and I'm here speaking from the Empire State Pride agenda from the LGBT community, but it's important to note that this isn't a bill that would only impact LGBT New Yorkers. It equally applies to heterosexual couples who may want to pursue surrogacy, and more high-profile celebrities have done so, and so it's not just an LGBT issue. So for that reason, I have high hopes that we can work in a bipartisan fashion.
Anthony, there are people who viscerally respond negatively to the idea of surrogacy, that you're in effect renting a woman's womb. And I only learned about gestational surrogacy today from you, from this program, and maybe even more so in that case. Then it's not even her biological child who she's carrying. She's purely a rental womb with one man's sperm and another woman's eggs. And there's a class issue where, it's going to be people with money renting the wombs of women without as much money. Is that exploitative?
Well, I can only speak to my personal experience with this, and I have an amazing relationship, still ongoing relationship with our surrogate mom. She was able to put herself through school. She was able to open a business on her own. She was able to relocate her family with the money.
May I ask how much?
I believe her part of the stake was about $30,000. But she didn't do it for the money. And I think if you speak with most surrogates, the money certainly may be a part of their decision in doing it, but they're doing it for truly altruistic reasons. You talk to many of them, and they either themselves personally had an issue conceiving, or they had a family member, they'd thought about it for a while. And it's not as though we're going out and recruiting these women. These women are seeking the surrogacy agencies so that they have the opportunity to do this, because
Do you
they
really think so? I mean, they could go out and volunteer for a food bank or something like that.
Well, it's a much more
Not make
profound.
themselves pregnant as a form of volunteer work.
It's a much more profound gift that they are giving, and I think that they see that. Certainly, the surrogates that I have met understand how profound the gesture is.
When will this law come up?
It could pass as early as the spring, once the legislature is back in Albany and in the full swing of things. So I think the soonest we would see significant progress is then. But there is a task force that has been appointed by the governor. It's called the Task Force on Life and the Law. And they are a number of professionals who take up concerns of bioethics. And they may issue a recommendation before the end of the year.
Just tell me very briefly, we just have 30 seconds. Politically, would it be a coalition of religious conservatives who don't like this medical technology for reproduction in the first place, and feminists, the strange kind of coalition between religious conservatives and feminists who feel it's exploitative to women?
We haven't heard much opposition from feminists now, and we've worked with a number of choice groups on the provisions of the bill, and so many of them are now supportive of the legislation. Okay. We can expect some religious opposition, as you would imagine.
Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And good luck
Thank
to
you.
with Time for Public Intellectual, where we look at new research with the power to change minds and public policy. Today, a study about compromise. It's been sorely lacking in Washington, I don't have to tell you, and elsewhere in recent years. But is the gridlock we see truly a matter of divergent ideas? Do the combatants ever stop and actually listen to each other? Apparently not much. It turns out if you pay people to step back and think for a minute, they'll be more willing to see the other side positively and consider compromise. Love and hate are not that far apart, according to a new study published in this month's proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The paper is titled Motive Attribution Asymmetry for Love versus Hate Drives Intractable Conflict. Joining us to translate that into English via Skype from Illinois, the lead author, Adam Waits, Assistant Professor of Management and Organizations at Northwestern University. Welcome to the program. Hello from New York.
Thank you very much for having me.
What was your basic research question?
Well, our basic research question was that we looked at the literature on what tends to drive intergroup conflict, be it between Democrats and Republicans or between Palestinians and Israelis. And it turns out most of the time, people engage in conflict out of reasons of love. They want to protect their own, defend their own, show affiliation toward their own group. Yet we thought that people have a misperception that when they're engaged in conflict, the other side is engaged in conflict because they hate us, not because of love for their own. So we wanted to test this explicitly and see whether this misperception exists. Basically, the misperception that when you ask me why my group is involved in a conflict, I would say, well, it's because we love our own, not so much that we hate the other side. But when you ask people, well, why is the other side involved in this conflict? They'll say, well, they hate us, not so much that they love their own.
It's so interesting. You know, I once did a call-in on my radio show where I just asked people to say what their group is, whatever their identity group is, whether it's by race or nationality or gender, whatever, and why they think they identify so strongly with the group. And caller after caller, no matter what they define their identity group to be, said, the reason they feel so strongly is because other people discriminate against them, and other people don't understand them, and other people don't like them. So you've academically proved something that I thought based on anecdotal evidence.
Sure. And, we see this in popular and public rhetoric all the time. You remember around the beginning of the 21st century, there was the famous Newsweek cover story, Why They Hate Us, essentially about the Muslim world. You recall George W. Bush famously saying, they hate us for our freedoms. So popular rhetoric tends to center around why the other side doesn't like us so much. And, I think it's kind of natural why we might think that, because when do we encounter the other side? Well, we only encounter the other side during conflict. We tend to hang out with people in our own groups, in our own political parties, in our own ethnicities. We like others that are like us.
So what variables did you test?
Okay, so what we tested explicitly, we went to Democrats and Republicans. When you think about current political gridlock, why is your own party engaged in this conflict? And they'll say, well, mostly out of compassion and empathy for our side. We ask them, is this out of compassion? Is it out of empathy? Or is it because of dislike and animosity toward the other side? And they said compassion and empathy more than dislike and animosity. But when we asked them about why is the other party engaged in this conflict, they said, well, dislike and animosity. And then we went to Israel and Palestine, and we asked Israelis and Palestinians to evaluate each other. And we saw the exact same pattern, that Palestinians said, well, Israelis support this conflict because they hate us. We're involved in this conflict more so because we love our own. Israelis said, we're involved in the conflict because we love our own.
And so then did you test messages that would change people's minds in the terms that you were just describing?
Yeah, so the best we could do in terms of changing other people's minds is we took a sample of Democrats and Republicans, and for half of the sample, we just simply said, all right, we'll pay you to be more accurate in your judgments of the other side. If you take a moment and think about what's the other side going to say they're driven by, and you're accurate, we will offer you a financial bonus.
Can you give us an example around a particular issue or something?
Well, we just simply said, over the next year, the Republicans and Democrats are going to have to debate a lot of things, from the Affordable Care Act to the distribution of wealth and taxes and things like this. So take a moment to think about, what is the other side going to say they're driven by in this current political conflict? And for half the people, we incentivized them with more money. For half, we just said, answer as you will. And when we offered people financial incentives, they seem to take a little longer and say, you know what, I bet the other side's going to say they're driven by love more so than hate.
So this is pretty abstract stuff. I mean, if you get down to political brass tacks, different groups' interests, not to mention values, do diverge so much. So if you have, largely older white males in the Tea Party who think that they're going to be taxed excessively to provide Obamacare to people who are mostly younger people of color who don't deserve the subsidy. This idea of love my group, hate your group breaks down pretty quickly as the salient issue, doesn't it?
Well, so you're correct that each party has particular issues, particular policy issues that they're prioritizing more or less. But interesting, when we ask people, what's the reason for your heavily aggressive involvement in this conflict, the reasons are the same. It's out of a place of love and protection and affiliation, or at least that's what people tell us.
So tell Mitch McConnell and Barack Obama how to apply this over Kentucky bourbon next year.
Right. Well, Kentucky bourbon might not be the best because we think what people really need to do is take some time to think about what the other side is actually motivated by. I think we have these gut reactions to say they're a hateful, barbaric group. we're the loving, honorable group. And I think really giving some people some time and some exposure to the other side is really the answer. Actually, maybe that bourbon will help if it at least.
It might.
progresses
The bourbon summit. Last question. Will it help over Thanksgiving dinner when the red state families come over?
I'm not going to answer that from a personal family perspective, but I think it's always good to get the other side's point of view. Certainly.
Thank you very much for joining us. Interesting research.
Thank you very much.
Up next, remembering Wetlands Preserve, the Tribeca Mecca of music and eco-activism. Today, it's hard to think of trendy Tribeca in Lower Manhattan as the hub of environmental activism and jam band rock. But from 1989 to 2001, a club called the Wetlands Preserve was the go-to place for both. The Dave Matthews Band, Blues Traveler, Fish, and The Roots all played there, and social activists met there. Here's a glimpse from the trailer of the documentary Wetlands Preserved, the story of an activist nightclub.
If you were of left-center politics and wanted to really make a change and believed in direct actions, that was a place where you'd probably hold a meeting. You weren't going to go, where else would you go?
He insisted on paper straws. They couldn't be plastic.
And then seeing barefoot people dancing in the eco section. They're barefoot. I've never seen anyone in a bar barefoot before.
I guess it was okay to be a hippie at Wetlands, and they didn't get the memo that hippies were over, you know, like, as well as dinosaurs and a lot of old things, but that's what was cool about it.
If you were playing improvised rock in the 80s and 90s, it was just the place you played.
It's just a simmering cauldron of jam band activity.
So many nights of really interesting, different combinations of people.
Wetlands really spearheaded the third wave of ska movement.
They had some hardcore stuff in there too, but I can wonder what those guys thought when they walked there and saw the hippie festival on the wall.
I just saw the little Volkswagen that they used to sell merch out of. I just saw it at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I took the air out of the tires. I took the air out of the tires out there.
You did?
Yeah, sure.
That's so bad.
It's only air.
That documentary came out 6 years ago. I'm told, by the way, that the whole movie has the energy of that trailer. I haven't seen the full film, but that's what I've been told. But to celebrate the 25th anniversary now of the Wetlands founding in 1989, there's a new book out called Wetlands NYC, History of Visual Encore, and it's by Laura Block-Bork, who co-founded the Wetlands with Larry Block, who you saw in that video clip. Laura joins us now. Hi, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Brian.
And I want to put the cover of the book right up for people to see. And you're going to tell us what we're looking at, including, I think, that bus in there. I guess that's in the lower right-hand corner.
Yep, the bus ended up at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when the club closed. It was on display for, I've been told, 5 or 6 years. And it's in storage now, and I'm working on trying to get it back out again for the book.
Why was now the time to remember Wetlands, and who do you think remembers it?
I think bands and fans of the club mostly is who I heard from during Kickstarter, which is
you
how
had a Kickstarter campaign
Yep.
to fund the book?
Funded that in 1 month and then produced the book in 5 months.
All right.
And, a lot of it had to do with Larry's passing in 2012. When he passed, he gave me all of his history on the club and said, I think there should be a more inclusive, you know, the movie was not made by us, and it was a great movie, but it didn't include everybody. He wanted everybody to get their credit, so I've tried.
and we're going to show you a few pages from the book here that show you how hard she tried. Let's put one up right now. This says on the upper right, best club to play in. Why was Wetlands the best club to play in for many bands?
Well, we got that several years, and it wasn't until Larry got best hardcore venue was he happy, because we were pegged as a hippie club from the beginning.
Oh, and New York Press is it's a neighborhood newspaper. There's a little conservative, right, that gave out that award, best club to play in.
And a lot of the bands will tell you it was because of the closeness they felt to the audience, which of course there was no choice. The audience was right in front of you, and they could jump on stage if they wanted to.
So when we think about these big bands, Fish, Dave Matthews.
They weren't big.
They weren't big yet.
They were getting there, but yeah. Fish came down to play New York City for the first time at Wetlands, and I'm sure they brought down fans, but that was another thing that Wetlands did, was actually try to develop bands. We didn't just place you in there, we were going to move you along to Saturday night and expose you to other audiences
Yeah.
that we thought would be interested.
So this is sort of the heart of the book, I think. Tell me.
It's my favorite calendar, because if you look, Dave Matthews
This is one
is,
particular month.
Yeah, it's just one
March
month.
what?
92, I believe.
Okay.
You can see Dave Matthews for $7 on a Thursday night, and Blind Melon, which was a brand new band, and Midnight Oil, which was already established, and that was my favorite night ever at the club.
Wow.
It was being taped by WBCN for broadcast, and
Rock station in Boston.
yeah, and the Wallflowers, Jacob Dylan. We were told we could not really publicize who he was, but the Wallflowers wanted to stand
Bob
on their own.
Dylan's son. You
Yeah.
couldn't use his name.
Well, we couldn't say that in any advertising, you know. We could say Jacob Dylan, but we could not say son of.
Which one did you say was your favorite night ever? at the club?
Midnight Oil.
Why? What happened?
Well, I didn't know that much about the music till that night, but Larry said to come, and I went. And first of all, I heard that Peter Garrett was running almost 104 fever and not sure if he could come on stage, so I didn't know what to expect. But he came out and blew it away, his sweat spraying the crowd.
Gerbs.
But it was very very memorable.
And so the book goes on page after page like this to some degree, looking at all these calendars, which
Yeah,
is
but
are
over
gonna be
700 photos, too.
Yes,
and-
right, there's some. Any one of these you want to
well,
point
this
out?
just really talks about the point of the club. Larry never wanted to be a live music nightclub, period. It was always about bringing the activism, social justice, and environmental to the forefront. And a lot of quote-unquote kids came in to hear the music, and you would have to walk through the earth station where the bus was and all the information was, and they would end up signing up for something, whether it was just signing a petition or joining a activist.
And there were a few things that you feel like you changed policy on, right?
I know the thing that Larry felt proudest about was 2.5 years of picketing brought the New York Times to stop buying their paper from some place that was killing the last old-growth forest in Canada, and I think that's what that picture is. It's un-American to cut down Canadian forests.
That's an accomplishment. So
we also
nightclub
brought that
producing
big
by
tree
day.
stump.
Sorry, you bought that big tree
That
stump?
tree stump came into the city and parked in front of the club for a while.
That's cool. So somebody cut down an old-growth tree to, no.
Well, no, it was touring the country. They didn't think they could get it into New York City, but we made sure they did.
So the club, as a center of eco-activism, people were like, you know, rocking out at night and picketing the New York Times during the day?
Yeah, well, you know, you could come in for the music and totally avoid that other section, but I think it did turn a lot of people on to issues they didn't know were issues. There was nothing back room about it. You had to walk through that area to get into the club to see a band.
Right, so you at least had it put in front of your face, and then you could decide if you wanted to
Oh
get
yeah,
involved.
it wasn't pushed.
Next slide is a very special night at the club.
Yeah.
Goodbye, and you can see it on the lower right, folks. Goodbye, Jerry Garcia, when he died, guitarist for the Grateful Dead in 1995.
And you'll see he was added to the mural that was on the wall. We had a big hippie mural, which I'm sure a lot of the hip-hop bands were uncomfortable with. Jerry got added.
And that's him right
really,
in the upper center there, for people who don't know what Jerry Garcia looked like, with the big glasses and the big gray beard and long hair.
And when he passed away, as soon as word got out, our phone started to ring off the hook. People from across the country who knew that we had a dead center night every Tuesday from when we opened till when we closed. And I think we were the only ones who ran it so steadily and consistently, and people started to come from across the country to be in a place where they could mourn with other deadheads.
Yeah, you said you ran a dead center night every Tuesday, so that's Grateful Dead tribute bands.
Yep. And, you know, Warren Haynes would play live. I mean, we had some great music that, you know, wasn't all Dead, but it was anything the Deadheads would like.
And they were
Tuesday
kind of a
nights.
previous generation to the bands that actually played there, and the Dead themselves never played Wetlands Preserve. So were they sort of
Parts of them did. Mickey Hart
the drummer?
came and, yeah. And
Weir?
I know that Bob Weir, yes. He was he was scheduled to be the last 2 nights of the club that never happened because of 9/11. We were going to close that week.
And it, okay, I've got 2 thoughts going on.
ahead.
One is the Grateful Dead as sort of the spiritual mentors, spiritual fathers of the whole genre of jam band at the time of Wetlands Preserve.
Yeah.
Right? Now, 9/11. You were going to close that week anyway. That was slated to be your last week. Was the actual
following
same
weekend.
week as 9/11. And what happened?
Well, 9/11 happened,
Yes.
but you know, everyone knew it was our last week. And
Which
there
was
were-
right there, by the way, Tribeca. So
Yeah.
World Trade Center area, more or less.
We were closed down. We were in that shut down, lockdown.
So what are we
area.
looking at here exactly?
Well, it just talks about how we were scheduled to close. I really didn't feel right writing about 9/11. It was it's just a big emotional topic. So I let the headlines do it. I mean, basically we were scheduled to close. Everyone was talking about it. Too bad, you know, there were a lot of clubs closing. It was, I believe, Giuliani, you know, cleaning up the city kind of thing. And
Oh, it wasn't just real estate
disappearing.
pressure?
Well, yes, it was gentrification of Tribeca too. I mean, we moved in there was nothing there. And then it became, you know, the hot place to live, so.
So you came back for one night post 9/11.
Pete Shapiro, who was the owner at that time, arranged for that one more night. And Robert Hunter came out of retirement.
From the Dead.
Yeah.
How long
he was the
after
lyricist
9/11?
for them. It was about 3 weeks.
Ah.
We were in you know, the neighborhood was in lockdown.
So who's the book for? Is it for people who did go and want this piece of nostalgia in binding?
It is definitely that, but it is also, in my opinion, it's a history that you'd have to glean your own stories from. You'd study it. You can see the booking strategy that we had, which a lot of clubs don't have, where it moved people along and found ways to expose them and develop an audience. And also Larry insisted on live DJ music between sets, which a lot of clubs, the vibe would change the minute the band stopped playing. They'd throw on a cassette tape. He was DJing to the band, to the club, to the crowd. I mean, so...
Cassette tape, what's that?
I know.
Is there a place in New York where jam bands can play, other than those that have already made it to stadium size?
Well, like, I'm not sure what the policy is at Pete Shapiro's venues, but I'm pretty sure he tries to carry on the jam band, let them go longer if they want to.
Yeah. Webster Hall, is that one? Is that his?
He's Brooklyn Bowl and the Capitol Theater in Portchester. That's where Mo just did their 25th anniversary for Wetlands. And
Well, congratulations on the book.
thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week at this hour. Next time, paintings preserve a pre-gentrified New York. And do tune into my radio program as well, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, a call-in on books that changed your mind about something. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.